Hey everyone, this is UV with the Black Bank, and today I wanted to share a very powerful story of an amazing man who is on a path of success and accomplishments, and this is after getting 20 years to life. Due to the sensitive content of this one-on-one conversation, listener discretion is advised. This conversation includes stories of childhood trauma that may make some people feel uncomfortable and sensitive to hear. I just wanted to warn you all. Do you prefer me to call you Frankie or Frank, Frankie D, or
Frank, that's fine either way.
Okay, awesome. What are you currently doing right now?
So currently, I'm still living in a transitional program
Mhm.
in South Central Los Angeles called the Francisco Homes. I've been out for about 15 months now.
Mhm.
I'm working. Um, a few of the goals that I'm working on, because I was 16 when I got incarcerated, I didn't know how to drive. So right now I got my permit, both for a car and a motorcycle. So I'm just driving, working, paying bills, being a responsible citizen. I
Awesome.
guess you could say.
What's the line of work you're doing right now? Like, what are you?
Okay, so I work for a nonprofit called Urban Alchemy,
Okay.
and specifically, there's three different branches. We do the pit stops, which are the restrooms, the automated restrooms in Los Angeles. They have the shower plus program where they offer showers for homeless or anyone else who wants to utilize the mobile shower units. And the branch I work for is LA Skid Row Clean, and we maintain the streets of Skid Row with litter abatement, picking up trash and whatnot amongst the homeless population in Skid Row.
Okay, awesome. So you're giving back, helping
Yeah,
the homeless.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, that's great to hear. I think that's such a positive way to give back. Um, I know that you're in LA. Are you originally from there?
Originally, I'm from a small city just outside of downtown called Hacienda Heights.
That's nice. Okay.
It's Los Angeles County, but right now I am living in South Central, which I'm not originally from, but it's close enough to home to call it home.
So you said you were out about 15 months, you said? Did I catch that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I got out on March 25th, 2019.
Okay. And so you said you were incarcerated since you were 16, right?
Yes,
Okay.
December 19th or December 17th, 1991, I was incarcerated.
1991. Okay. So before we get into that part, I guess growing up in LA, what was that like for you? Was how like who were your people that surrounded you? Like who were you raised by? What did that look like?
So I know more or less the format you're looking for. It's very similar to a conversation you would have with the parole board. In order to actually be found suitable, you have to have the understanding of your childhood growing up and the traumas and the residual effects that come from those traumas and how it affected your decision making process and the people around you who influenced you in good and both bad ways. So would you like me to include traumas along the way? Because
Yes, you can.
okay, so like I said, I was born October 17th, 1975. My mother Sherry and my father Frank. I don't remember my parents being married. I believe they were divorced before I really started having memories. So early on, I know it would be. I lived with my dad. I adored my dad. Absolutely adored my dad. He was like the biggest figure in the world to me.
Mhm.
And then on the weekends, this really sweet, pretty lady would come pick me up, and take me to McDonald's or take me to Magic Mountain. My father decided when him and my mother split up that he got custody. And when I guess my dad said something, my mom listened. They had a rocky relationship. Both of my parents are alcoholics. Unfortunately, my father was also a heroin addict. So I lived with my dad growing up, and then one day they brought this little girl to the house that was a couple years older than me, and it turns out it was my sister. So my immediate family unit is my father, my mother, me, and my sister. But the first couple years of my life, I didn't remember my sister. Um, so we lived with my dad. About the age of 5 years old, um, my father had overdosed on heroin, and we went to go stay with my mom. He didn't die from that overdose, but I originally found him in the bathroom unconscious, and I didn't understand what was going on.
And you were 5 at the age around there?
I was 5 years old, yeah.
Okay.
And at that time, sometimes we would be staying at my grandparents' house, um, which was a very abusive situation for me. For whatever reason, my grandmother didn't really like me. She
Mm-hmm.
didn't like my father, for that matter. And my grandmother used to abuse me a lot. She broke my arm, I think, when I was about 3 or 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always just had this deep fear of ever going to her house because, the way she would treat me. Um,
Did
and
and
go ahead.
did this is your mom was still in the picture, right? This is when your dad had overdosed at the time and your mom was there. Was your mom aware of any of the things that were going on when you would go over to your
No,
grandparents?
actually, when I was at my grandmother's house, and she had broke my arm, I was eating at the table a blueberry muffin, and my grandmother had just redid her whole kitchen, and the blueberry muffin had made me nauseous, and I
Mm-hmm.
ended up throwing up on the table. And as disturbing as it's going to sound, this is my reality. My grandmother tried to put my head in the throw up and make me eat it,
Mm-hmm.
and she had twisted my arm behind my back, and eventually my arm snapped and broke, and I started crying, and she just walked away.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom had come to pick me up from my grandmother's that day, and my arm was just kind of dangling at my side, and I kept telling my mom, my arm hurts, my mom hurts. Excuse me, my arm
Mm-hmm.
hurts. And so my mom thought, I was just, maybe I fell down playing or something. Took me home, and I remember her telling me to go clean my room, and I couldn't pick nothing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so after 3 days of me complaining how bad my arm hurt, my mom finally took me to the doctors. And, this was back in the late 70s, early 80s,
Mm-hmm.
where child abuse really wasn't a big thing. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of bad things happened, and child protective services weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
And they told my mom that my arm had been broken for 3 days. And they
Oh.
actually kind of like investigated her a little bit. But after that, I never wanted to go back to my grandmother's.
Yeah, and it's crazy as you're saying all this. Like I do the line of work I do. I work with children, and kind of making sure that they're safe. And it's crazy to think like at some point in many lives there's been all this like abuse that was really never talked about. So and I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Because there's a lot of people that still don't even share things from the past, and
Yeah.
it's not easy, but also I think it's important to know that like we all have a voice and we can always like have a person that we can trust. And I wanted to ask you too, I thought to myself, like, did you ever have an adult that you can trust when you were younger, or was it kind of not really
You know,
there?
before I started doing a lot of my healing and my introspective look at me, and understanding who I was and why I was that person, I used to place a lot of blame
Mm,
on all the figures in my life. And I remember making the statement to my mom one day that there wasn't anybody in my life that hadn't at some point turned their back on me,
mhm,
whether it been through alcoholism, where the bottle was more important than the kid, or through physical abuse or sexual abuse.
mhm,
As a child, I was molested on multiple occasions. And as a kid, you don't have a voice. But that was one of the most significant events in my life that led to my defects. When I was still living with my dad, he had left me with one of his friends, and his friend Richard. And Richard started touching me, making me touch
mhm,
him. And my dad had actually came back early and walked in while it was happening. And I remember I was pushing myself back up against the couch because I was just a little tiny kid,
mhm.
and I just felt this fear. And then
Yeah.
my dad like kicked in the door and just literally started beating the crap out of Richard right there in front of me, and which escalated my fear because now there's this altercation going on, and I'm not understanding why all this is happening.
Yeah.
Um, and then my dad literally kicked him on the floor with his foot all the way out of the house. And he came back in, and he picked me up in his arms, and he just held me, and he was saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And it just felt so comforting. It's like my superhero just saved me.
Yeah.
I've always referred to my dad as my superhero.
Yeah.
Um,
And
it actually, it kind of planted the seeds for a little formula that I would start to live by. It was like fear plus violence equals comfort. Like,
mhm.
this I have this fear. You act out, and you can get away to that safe place. So that was the first instance where I had been molested as a kid, and later on, my dad, another one of his friends, this time it was a 19-year-old female babysitter, and the molestation with her escalated over time to become more and more and more. But in my confusion with her, I actually started looking forward to it. I started enjoying it, like our little secret moments alone.
Yeah.
And deep down, I knew we were doing something wrong, but like I said, as a kid, I was kind of enjoying it. I never realized growing up how that would teach me to objectify women.
Yeah.
Because I didn't see nothing wrong with this, but I knew there was something wrong with his friend Richard who did it. So when I was about 7 years old, I was living with my mom, and my dad came over one night, and he tells me and my sister, he's like, "I got to talk to you guys." We're like, "All right." So he tells my sister, "Go in the kitchen and burn a piece of toast, and bring me the burnt toast with the butter knife." So my sister goes in the kitchen. She comes back with the toast, and he says, "This toast is me." He said, "And the burnt part of the toast is what I have going on inside of me." And my young mind couldn't even comprehend. He was trying to explain cancer. So then he got the butter knife, and he said, "This is the doctor's." And he started scraping and scraping and scraping on the toast till eventually the knife just poked through the bread. And he said, "There's only so much they could do before it's just more damage than good." And he said, "I'm getting old, and it's that time." And I was like, "No, Dad, you're not getting old. Like you're always gonna be here. Like this is my superhero,
It's not easy to share like the pain, but the reason I'm also doing this, it's because it's so powerful. Like to hear people's story. And I know like a lot of fear isn't really shared out to many people because it's always like this, it's that fear of like, oh shoot, if I share this, like people are going to think this, and reality is like, we all go through crap. Like,
absolutely.
Every single person goes through something. There's not one person who doesn't go through anything and who their life is like, at some peak where it's like, holy, I think there's always going to be some form of pain in someone's life. And but for you to share it, that to me is I'm so grateful for this moment and the pain that we all go through and how we can all relate in some way, because each experience is different, but the pain is very similar, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely makes total sense. And I'd like to say, like, these are all things I've come to terms with. Obviously, I haven't revisited this part with my dad in a little while. Because this is the next significant thing that happened in my life that really had the deepest impact on the way I would start carrying out my day-to-day choices. That night, my father went out and he got, I believe, 11 grams of heroin and poked holes in, I think, 9 or 10 of them, and he swallowed them. And then he did a fix with one. Like I said, my father was a heroin addict, and he intentionally overdosed and he committed suicide. And once I understood that my father chose to leave this earth, he chose to no longer be a part of my life, it started developing in me insecurities and self-doubt, and low self-worth started to take shape. Like, why wasn't I good enough for him to stay? Why didn't he love me enough? Like, what's wrong with me? And those little seeds got planted, and I wasn't even aware that they were planted. But as I continued to grow, now my decisions are being made and fueled by these insecurities and character defects. Like I'm running around feeling inadequate and not even realizing it. I'm thinking this is just my normal way of thinking. To where it could be like later on into my teen years, I could ask you as my friend, "Hey, you think I could borrow $5 and I'll pay you back next week when I get my allowance or my pay from this little job I'm doing." "Oh no, I'm sorry, I don't got it." The way my mind would process it was I wasn't good enough to lend money to, or you didn't trust me to pay you back. I never stopped to think that maybe you just didn't have it, or maybe you had your own bills. I was just so full of self in a negative way. And then that would in turn fuel the way I would act the way in my relationships. I started pushing people away, like, well, fine then, but
Yeah.
I don't want you to leave, but get away.
Yeah, and I think that happens, you get so, I mean, there's a point where you get pushed over to think like, oh shoot, like, is it me? Like, and I think, now, there's some things that you've said that I can be like, oh yeah, like I've blamed things on like adults because like I would see things as a kid that I'm like, I shouldn't be seeing that, or I shouldn't even be hearing that. And for me, I'm just like, dang, like I'm just gonna keep it to myself because I'm gonna get in trouble if I say something. Or so for me it was like, oh well, I better not say anything because I'm gonna get in trouble or something. And I think a lot of it too comes from not understanding like where they are too, like the adults. Like I'm sure that your dad, like you said, he probably went through, there was so much that he was going through, and also like behind that, like him growing up as a kid, there's always a backstory to every like present moment to where someone is.
No, absolutely. And later on in life, when I found out that backstory, I developed the understanding I needed to heal through that. But at the time, I had personalized it. Like today, I know his decision to take his life had nothing to do with me or his love for me. But in fact, his mother had cancer when he was a kid, and she tried to battle through it for the family, and she suffered battling cancer. And the family in turn suffered watching her slowly die. And my father was actually preventing the family from having to go through that. In his decision, it was like, I'm not going to make my kids go through what I had to go through. But my young eyes didn't see that. I'll never agree with the decision he made. I've done my part to separate me from the decision he made, and just see the father that I had while I had him. But no one can ever tell me he wasn't the greatest man in the world. Even though I hear stories that contradict that. I see my dad the way I seen him, and a good portion of who I am as a man today was shaped by him. And today I could say I'm proud of who I am. So I credit that to him.
Yeah, and that's amazing that you see that from him. And like you said, you hear these stories maybe about your dad otherwise, but that he was your hero and he showed you that. So I definitely get that.
When my father had committed suicide, me and my sister went to go live with my mother. And my mother was a struggling single mom. She was working 2 jobs, wasn't always at home necessarily because she had to be at one job or another. But she always did her best to take care of us. There was a roof over my head. There was clothes on my back, and I was fed. I might not have had all the toys I wanted, or all the things that the other kids had. But I mean, in retrospect, I was taken care of. But again, alcoholism ran rapid. So I was exposed to a lot of drinking and drugs growing up. There was domestic violence going on with some of her boyfriends. We moved around a lot. And when I was in 5th grade, my mom had a nervous breakdown. And me and my sister woke up in the middle of the night, and all we heard was glass breaking and shattering. And we walked out, and my mom was in the kitchen breaking every single dish and cup and glass that she could get her hands on. And I don't remember how that night ended, but I know as a result, me and my sister went to live with our grandparents in Washington, which was a good and a bad thing because I got to go see a lot of family that I didn't know, meet a lot of cousins, and see that there was just more than me and my mom and my dad and my sister. But at the same time, I was separated from my mom for like a year. And about a year later, we came back. I think it was about 1986, 1985, 1986. We came back, and that's when we started living in Hacienda Heights. And my mom had a boyfriend named Jack, great man. But again, as a kid, this is a guy that's taking away the attention that I want, So me and him, we didn't get into it a lot, but I was real standoffish with him. And one night, he was also a heavy drinker. One night, he had ordered a pizza for us, and I'll never forget this. He used to like ordering half the pizza with jalapenos for him. And me and my sister didn't like jalapenos on our pizza. Yeah. So we would get our pepperoni or Canadian bacon, whatever we would get on our side of the pizza. And when the pizza came, we opened up the box, we sit down and start eating, and he starts eating on our side of the pizza. So I thought that was a little odd since he had a whole half of the pizza to himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so when our side of the pizza was gone, I grabbed a piece off of his side and I picked off the jalapenos and I threw them in the box. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm eating pizza." He said, "Your side's gone already." I said, "Well, then you should have started on your side." And he said, "Look, I'm not your dad. It's not my job to feed you." And that just shattered me.
Yeah.
Like, fuck this man. I don't want nothing to do with this man. You're right. You're never going to be my dad. I'm never going to listen to you. And I ran out of the room crying because at that age, it was still bad. The baggage from my dad's suicide was still developing. So it was it hit hard when he said that. So that started creating the feeling of I don't want to be at the house. You know, I would leave the house as much as I could. I would stay out in the streets playing stickball with my friends or basketball. Eventually started hanging around with some gang members. But there was just the kids in the community, you know, that I lived in.
Yeah.
It wasn't a really bad neighborhood. It was on the verge of heading in a bad area because a lot of the gang movies were coming out, like Colors, and everyone wanted to be a gang member all of a sudden. But it created a kind of a resentment for the household that I lived in.
Yeah.
And then I would see how much attention my mom was giving her boyfriend. And I remember this one particular time I had a pair of shoes that had a hole in the bottom of them and I needed new shoes. And my mom was like, "You're just too rough on shoes. You don't make them last long enough. I don't have money to keep buying new pairs of shoes." And then she went out and bought him brand new tires for his car. And I was just like, fuck this. You know, like I just felt really alone and isolated. And then again, my insecurities and self-doubt were like full-fledged in force now. So I started drinking. I started drinking one night with my friends, just like as an experiment, and I got shit-faced drunk. And in that shit-faced drunkenness, I found just this contentment of nothing matters. I don't feel nothing. I don't feel bad about myself. I don't feel good about myself, but I don't feel bad about myself.
The numbness.
And then that turned into smoking weed. So by the age of 15, 16, I had been kicked out or ran away from home 2 or 3 times already. I'm already smoking weed on a regular basis, drinking alcohol. I got just this swirl of emotions inside that I don't even understand. And unfortunately, when I was 16 years old, I won't get too much into it out of respect for the family, but I did commit a murder when I was 16 years old while I was under the influence of alcohol and weed. I was in juvenile hall for about 3 or 4 months. Then I ended up going to YA. And by 17 years old, I was already on the mainline level 4 in the penitentiary. And that was a whole nother pill to swallow. At 17 years old, I have a life sentence. I don't know who I am as a person. I don't know how to deal with the shit I got going on inside me already. And now I got to digest the fact that not only did I take somebody's life wrongfully, but now I got to sit in prison for the rest of my life because of it. And it was just such a hopeless feeling. Especially at this time, you know, I got arrested in 1991. I couldn't name you a single lifer that paroled during the 90s because there was a no parole policy in the state of California. The governor was flat out like, if you committed a murder, you're going to die in prison. I'm not letting you out. So at 17 years old, I felt like my life was already over. And I felt hopeless. I really, really felt hopeless.
Yeah. And so let me go back a little bit.
Go ahead.
So I've worked with a lot of kids before, a lot of young kids, and I realized that a lot of them do go through a lot of like domestic violence at home, child abuse, and a lot of it drives them away from home. Me as a kid, I was also raised by a single mom. She raised 3 of us, and we lived kind of in an area where it wasn't the best area, the best neighborhood. But I realized that my mom wasn't always there, and she tried to work so hard to get us out of like the 1-bedroom apartment where we all lived. So, but she eventually did, and she got us out to a better like neighborhood. And I realized, like, if I would have stayed where we were in that area, a lot of the people we were surrounded by ended up in being affiliated in gangs, being affiliated in other things. And I was like grateful for my mom to actually get us out of there. But
Yeah.
I think to myself, like, a lot of kids don't have that opportunity, or either have like these other choice. They don't have much choice. So what do you think would have like maybe helped you not go through a path where you would have ended in the system, or you would have ended like maybe going to the direction that you did? Like, what do you think would have helped you? Like, looking back, like, if I would have had someone, if what, like, what for you do you think, like, what could have helped me?
You know what? When I was in 7th grade, they called me to the office at school, and they asked me to step inside a room, and there was about 5 or 6 other kids inside this room. And I guess it was some kind of like counselor, grieving counselor or something. And I remember, I never forget. He started off with, "All of you in this room have something in common. Do you know what it is?" And we're looking around each other. I mean, these are kids I've seen in the hallway. Some of them I know, some of them I don't. And he said, "All of you have lost a parent." Just real matter of fact, all of you have lost a parent. And then it made me look at the kids in the room in a different light.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you what came out of that little hour we spent in that room. I know we didn't deal with grief and loss. I know there wasn't no emotional regulation or any type of, let's try to help understand what we're going through. Let's identify your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put a label on them so we know how to deal with them. And I actually had this conversation with Carl. Looking back, I wish that there was some kind of emotional regulation class curriculum in school to help children that are dealing with trauma, that don't even understand the residual effects that come years or months or decades after you go through something. Like, let's identify what you went through. Let's talk about how you feel about it. Let's talk about some solutions to that feeling, or what are some things we can do so you don't feel that way. There was none of that. Like I said, it took me till I was 36 years old to understand my insecurities and inadequacies that were connected to my father's suicide. That was the ball and chain I carried around and didn't understand why I had it. I didn't even understand that it was there. I just thought, this is normal. This is normal me. But it wasn't. That was abnormal me. That was me trying to cope and deal with the loss that I didn't know how to deal with.
Yeah.
So I would say that, like, honest conversations, like, don't look at me like a kid. Look at me like a person you want to help heal, like an adult that needs healing. Yeah. And let's have a raw, open, honest conversation. Yeah. Because I'll tell you right now, my mom didn't know I was molested till she read my parole transcripts from my parole hearing. She never knew that happened, because when my father picked me up and comforted me and held me in his arms, and he said, "I'm sorry," and he put me down and he walked out of the room crying. I felt like I did something wrong. And the fact that he didn't say nothing else to me, okay, we're not supposed to talk about this. I'm not supposed to say nothing. So I knew when my mom came that weekend to pick me up, he was going to tell her something.
Yeah.
And when he told her something, I was going to be in trouble. And he didn't mention it to her. So I knew I wasn't supposed to talk about it, because I must have done something wrong. Now I start feeling shame. The self-doubt and the shame and the inadequacies and the insecurities just totally damaged my self-esteem.
Yeah.
But none of them are real. And had someone sat me down and talked to me about that, I would have understood. Maybe not right away. And it might have taken someone that looks like me or acts like me or has been through the life that I could understand, okay, this person knows. Because I wasn't really receptive to the guy that showed up in the suit and the tie and said, well, I just got my PhD from Harvard and I'd like to sit down and talk to you. What are you going to tell me?
Yeah.
I wasn't open-minded to that. I needed someone that I felt like I could relate to, that I could trust, that I could lean into and just bear myself. But I didn't know I needed that.
Yeah. And man, you make such a good point. You're right. I think that we, like, adults, need to teach kids and be there as real as they can. Like, I'm around kids most of the time. And one of the things is, like, I didn't ever want to put myself, like, all the way up here for them to think that I was never a kid. Like, I want them to know, like, I get what you're going through. Like, I've either been there or I get where you're coming from, but I'm not going to treat them any less. And I think that a lot of these kids don't have that support from like adults. And it also depends of your background. Like for me, my mom, she's very like doesn't like to talk about certain things. And a few years back I went through depression, and she would look at me and be like, you need to not feel like that, like just get over it. And for me, I was like, oh shoot, I'm gonna hide, and I went into a really dark depression for a while, and that for me hit me hard because I didn't even know I had depression at the time. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to talk to anyone about it. I was like, if I say it out loud, people are gonna think I'm crazy. Like they're gonna think I'm like, hey, you shouldn't be feeling that way. And I think you make a good point, like teaching people how to like express their emotions, and that it's okay to share your emotions. And I think a lot of adults now struggle with, like, if they have kids, struggle with teaching their kids that because they were never taught that.
Yeah, and that you bring up a good point, because a lot of what we know is based on what our families knew when they were growing up. Like it's handed down generation to generation. But like I have the awareness now. Like I don't have any kids. I hope someday to have kids. Mm-hmm. But I have the awareness now to break that cycle. Yeah. I have the awareness to know my kid's not going to grow up in a house full of alcoholics. And I mean nothing bad to my parents when I say that, because I love everything my parents gave me. Yeah. But that's part of the narrative. Yeah. That was there. That was something I was exposed to. That gave me the ability to go out and pound alcohol in the streets with my friends at night, because it was all right. That's what they do at home. Yeah. But I think learned behaviors are very important, and that's also part of the solution in my eyes for teens or kids that have suffered trauma, that are taught to deal with it by someone that knows how, because some of our parents don't. Like I said, my mom. One day I had a conversation with her. I'm a grown man. I'm already on my tail end of coming out of prison, and my mom was more or less, taking blame for some of the stuff that that I had gone through and the outcome. And I was like, no. Like, one, I made my choices. I made my decisions. As wrong as they were mine to make. Mm-hmm. And I made them with what I knew at the time. And when you were raising me with what you knew. I've been fortunate enough that I've gone through programs where I've done CBT and cognitive research drug treatment. Thinking for Change, that curriculum was huge in my life. My mom never had that. She never had it. She's got traumas that I know about that I know she's never healed from. And I'm sure that affected her parenting. But that wasn't what she meant to do. She was just doing what she had. Yeah. So like I have no ill will towards the things I was exposed to from my parents growing up, because I know they were just doing what they knew. Yeah.
And a lot of it, like you said, it's learned behavior. Like they learn that for them. And it's harder to change sometimes when you're already grown sometimes. And like my parents, they're going to think one way, and I know they are, but I respect them. Like, hey, I can make my own choices. I know I have a voice and I can use that. So I think it's so important, definitely, like to reach out to as many people as we can in a way to impact them differently than what we're used to, like being raised, or how we're being used to being raised. Yeah. Makes sense? Yeah.
I wish I would have had someone trying to understand what I was going through and help me understand what I was going through. Mm-hmm. I heard you say right now that, if they want to change, they don't even know anything's wrong yet. Yeah. They don't. You know what I mean? So it just takes someone to point out, hey, this might not be right inside. You might be feeling some type of way, and it's causing you to make these decisions. Because before someone opened my eyes to that, I thought everything I was doing was normal. Yeah. I didn't realize. I thought these were my characteristics, not my character defects. Yeah. This is just who I am. No, I was broken inside, but I didn't know it.
All right. Thanks again for taking the time to watch The Black Bank with UV. This is only the beginning to Frankie's story. In the next episode, Frankie will share his life incarcerated from the age of 16. Again, I want to appreciate everyone for your support. It motivates me to continue sharing powerful conversations. Make sure to subscribe and share this link with others. Thanks.